everybody. Welcome to ISARA night. It's our third quantum meetup meeting, and I'm so glad you guys could make it. We have a wonderful guest, Dr. Laforest. He was, am I pronouncing it right?
Okay. I don't remember anymore.
Okay, great. He's, I don't know what he does at ISARA, but he was the public relation coordinator at IQC for many, many years. 10 years? 8 years. Okay, great. So he's going to tell us lots of great things about quantum computation, I assume in general, and then tell us a little bit more about what ISARA does. I'm really excited to know more really about ISARA because we hear a lot about it. It's a very, very successful quantum startup here in the Quantum Valley, but I don't know exactly details of what they do, so we're going to hand it over to him and learn more.
Well, thank you. Everybody can hear me okay? I tend to start screaming sometimes, so if you hear me too well, just let me know and I'll shut it down. I will not stop screaming, but I'll shut down the microphone. So, actually, I'm not really here to talk about ISARA per se. I'm not here to do a sales pitch. It's called a Quantum Enthusiasts. I'm here to talk about the arena in which we play. Okay, I'm more than happy to talk about who we are as a company, but I think I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the arena we play, and then why we exist, and then why is the actual community of post-quantum cryptography exists, and so on. So I'm not going to rely too much on my slide because I know there's pizzas, there's water. I was hoping there would be beer. I guess not. We're going to go for a beer after work. I'm trying to keep it as informal as possible. So I'll just spend a couple minutes, maybe more than a couple minutes, but sometimes kind of giving you the spiel, and then hopefully we can just talk. And then I much prefer answering the question you might have than just me spewing things in your face and keep on going. So maybe a little bit about myself, like Risa explained. So I work at ISARA. I'm actually the senior product manager there and also the resident quantum expert. It's actually on my business card. I'm a quantum expert at ISARA. So it's always been a dream of mine to put that on my credit card, on my business card. So I've been there for about 8 months now. Previous to that, I was an academic my entire career. So I was what you could call maybe probably one of the first generation of quantum information scientists that were trained as quantum information scientists. So I know I look very young, but I'm not that young. And when I started my PhD, most of the professors or the labs, they were not built to be quantum computing labs. They were kind of people who diverted to that new and cool, promising research area. And the people my age who were sort of the first generation to come in and did our entire PhD in the subject of quantum computing, quantum information, quantum communication. So I did my PhD right here in Waterloo in the very early days of IQC, the Institute for Quantum Computing, just down the road. Just to give you a sense of how early on it was, when I started, this was about the size of our entire monthly meeting, including wives, husbands, and kids. So we would have, I remember having IQC-wide lunch meeting with 3 pizzas from Domino's. Nowadays, there's 310 people at IQC, right? So it grew up a lot. So I did my PhD there. I was working with Curelet-Balan. It was sort of kind of going in between theory and experiments. So we were developing protocol to better understand noise in quantum systems, because noise is what prevents us from having a quantum computer today. That's like the thing we need to fight against. So we were developing new protocols on trying to understand the noise, trying to control it, and how to mitigate it using quantum error correction, optimal control theory, and then we would go in the lab and implement that in using spin in molecules using magnetic resonance. So this is sort of where I come from. And then after that, I moved to Netherlands, where I did a postdoc in even more experimental using using quantum dots, spin and quantum dots. So, condensed matter physics, where we're isolating single spin on 2-dimensional surface, and then we're trying to control them. But throughout my entire research career, which spanned about 8 years, one of the things that I was doing a lot on the side was public speaking like this. It's always been a passion of mine, communicating science, teaching, public speaking. So even as a grad student at IQC, I was sort of the go-to guy as when it came to, hey, they're looking for a public speaker to talk about what we do here, who would like to go, and I was always the guy like, I want to go. So luckily enough, I was able to turn that into a job. So when I finished my postdoc, I knew IQC was looking for someone that might start their outreach department, PR, like sort of getting the science out of the lab. So I was lucky enough to land that job. So that brings us into 2010, where I got brought back to IQC to sort of to lead the effort on how do we get the science that we do into people's life. In simple terms, creating programs, creating information brochures, anywhere from communication, marketing, educational. We created summer programs for undergrad, for high school students, and so on and so forth. So I've done that for about 8 years. I had a ton of fun. But you know, 8 months ago, an opportunity kind of arose to go try and learn new skill in the private sector, which I've never learned. And then the private sector right here in town, in the heart of Quantum Valley, at a company called ISARA, which works in post-quantum cryptography. So it's not even a quantum company. We don't really do quantum stuff, but we do things. The reason we exist is because of quantum. So I'll go into the details of this. But this is give you a bit of the background where I come from. Like, I'm a hardcore experimental physicist, and then now I build the software, and I don't know how to code, so it's really nice. That's why we have coders for this. I know MATLAB a little bit. Okay, so who was here last meeting with John Donahue? Any of you? So, by the way, John, he's the younger version of me. He's actually the one who replaced me at IQC. He was doing a much better job than I ever done, so he's good. So I'm sure last time with John, he explained you all the details of what quantum computing is. This is not the focus of my talk today. If you're really a newbie and you still don't know what quantum computing is, I'll be happy to entertain you a bit later. Just say, hey, what's quantum computing? And then I'll go on the 2-hour diatribe and explain how quantum computing is. But I would just start assuming that you have heard kind of what quantum computing is. You know, we build this new type, like fundamentally new type of computing platform which works with quantum bits that are not just bits and bytes and logic, but we use the behavior of atoms and molecules, which have some very funny and interesting behavior. We use that to do calculation, to do sensing, to do communication. So that's sort of the whole umbrella of quantum technology. And then we hear, especially these days, for the past couple of years, we hear every single day the benefits, the promises of quantum computing. Right? So I just listed a few here. You know, quantum computers, because they use the laws of quantum mechanics, will really allow us to simulate quantum systems, understand how material behave, and then we'll be able to finally crack open the mystery of high-temperature superconductors, or crack open the mystery of spintronics, and be able to build new generation of electronics that is more energy efficient and much faster. It's all great. So the idea of maybe it can be used for big data, because quantum computing is this very powerful platform. Assuming that it's very powerful and it can be used for big data is a bit of an intellectual shortcut. Because one thing that I really hope that you know by now is that a quantum computer is just not a magical box that just do everything well. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it sucks. Okay? So just saying like, oh, our big data software sucked today because our computers are not powerful enough. Here's quantum computer to the rescue. That's not that simple. But there are some tasks of big data where quantum computers seems to be helping out. Same thing with machine learning and AI. Right? Quantum computer will not solve AI. It will not make it like so much more better, but it might help out a little bit. We're still figuring out where. Chemistry, that's another big promise. I myself as a scientist, this is where like I get really excited. Like there's so many things in science and physics and chemistry that we don't understand. And that's what prevents us from doing things we would like to do. Like on the chemistry side, for example, one of my favorite examples is the idea of fertilizers. So fertilizers, we use them a lot, right? That's how our agriculture depends on them. That's how we put the nitrogen back in the soil. And then to do that, we need to take the nitrogen from the air and then put them into like a bag of plastic by a Home Depot. This process is ridiculously archaic and is insanely energy costly. So energy costly that today we actually use 3% of the world's energy just to produce fertilizers. It's quite crazy when you think about it. So why? It's like, well, because we only know one process that allows us to do nitrogen fixation. It was discovered in 1902, and it hasn't evolved since, and it's uses a lot of energy, and that's what we have. But chemistry tells us it should be possible to use catalysts that will turn, the azote in the air into French kicking in that. Nitrogen in the air, and then turns into nitrogen into a solution that is more salt that you can put in, as part of your fertilizer. Chemistry says it's possible, but how? Right? Catalysts are typically those really, really big molecules made of thousands and thousands of atoms. In order to understand how to turn one molecule into another one by the help of a catalyst, you need to do quantum chemistry. You need to do quantum simulation. We know exactly the equations. The equations are Schrödinger equation. Gives you, the kinetic energy and the potential energy. We know exactly what those are. But knowing the equations doesn't mean that you know how to solve them, right? So although we know exactly how to set the problem, we are not able to solve the problem because the computers that we have today are notoriously bad at solving Schrödinger's equation. But a quantum computer, it uses the same behavior that we're trying to simulate. So it kind of makes sense that quantum computers are very good at simulating quantum behavior. And it sort of intuitively makes sense, but you can prove it on paper. Yes, quantum computers are really good at doing this. So it could help out design catalysts that do exactly what we want them to do. Instead of doing trial and error, we say you need to design a molecule that works like this. And then you give that to your chemistry friend, and then they go figure out how to create that molecule. But this today, we don't have that computing power. So fertilizer is one of my favorite examples because it's 3% of today's energy. And we live in a world where it's getting hard to do energy. High temperature superconductors. Superconductors exist. You can go to John's lab, they'll show you a puck of superconducting material, is going to cool it down and going to do some really cool trick with it. Make it levitate, you can show that it can carry electricity with no friction or no resistance whatsoever. But in order to do that, you have to dip it in liquid nitrogen, which is minus 196 degrees. Right? So it's not really useful for building electronics. Like you don't want to carry your cell phone in a liquid nitrogen bath. Or if you're trying to carry electricity from one place to the other, it's not very useful to have to hose it down with liquid nitrogen all the time. Right? But now when you think about it, about 15% of the energy that we produce get lost in transmission. That's a lot of energy. But not also that. Like, why is it still in 2019 that we still use coal and natural gas and even sometimes wood or diesel to produce electricity? Because there are places where we need electricity, but there's no renewable resource. And we're going to just bring the electricity there because it gets lost and transferred because of resistivity. What if we have superconducting material that works at room temperature? Then there's no need to build an electric central every 1,000 kilometers or so. You just build one big ass one where the energy is available and then bring it wherever you want at zero energy cost. So high temperature superconductors, massive impact to society. But in order to do that, we need to understand how superconductors work, and we don't. Again, we have the equations, but we cannot solve them. So we have clues, but we don't really have the exact, we don't fully understand why a material that has this structure allows for electrons to freely flow in it. Those are sort of the more scientific type of positive implication that really gets us excited. But there's all the other ones as well, computer science, AI, whatever pattern. So this is typically what you hear about, and this is what you should hear about. Right? That's the positive stuff of quantum computing, how it's going to impact society, how it's going to change everything, make us a better world, yada yada, kumbaya, great. But there's also a dark side of it. Right? Like every single powerful technology can create good and can create bad. But in order to get the good, we need to make sure that the bad is mitigated as much as possible. And one of the bad things we know about quantum computing is that it can be extremely dangerous to our information security. Actually, even worse than this, that was the very first application of a quantum computer we found. That if we can build a quantum computer large enough, we can break information security as we know it, or cryptography. So maybe to give you a little bit of a quick background of information security and cryptography. So first of all, it's everywhere. Okay? Every time you send a text, every time you punch in your password, something, every time you use your credit card, every time you go at the ATM machine, every time you send anything into the cloud or something happened, like the magic of internet, things get encrypted. Because you always have to assume that every time you send something on the internet, people are listening, and they are. If you think that governments are not listening to the internet, then you're a fool. They are, okay? So the way we can circumvent that and keep our privacy is by encrypting stuff. And how do we encrypt stuff nowadays? Is we use very hard mathematics. Okay? And we essentially do the equivalent, the mathematical equivalent of building cakes. Okay? So if I want to encrypt something, it's like if I was building a cake from the recipe and the ingredient, and I make the cake. I put them together, bake it, and then I have a cake. But in order to undo the cake, you either have to have the recipe, or you need to figure out how to undo the cake on your own, which is a very, very hard task. So cryptography, that's the equivalent of this. Very easy to encrypt information, easy to make a cake, extremely hard to decrypt it, undoing the cake. Okay? There's many different methods. One of them that I like, because it's very simple to explain, is RSA. RSA is not used that much anymore because it's a little slow, and we got smarter and better ways. But RSA is very simple mathematics. The mathematical problem that relies on is the idea of factoring. So factoring is the reverse of multiplying. So I take two numbers and multiply them together. 3 and 5, I get 15. Right? So multiplication is a very simple mathematical operation. Right? You know exactly how to do it. You've learned it in grade 2. If I give you a 5-digit number multiplied by a 5-digit number, you can do it. If I give you a 200-digit number and ask you to multiply by a 200-digit number, it will take you longer. You'll need a lot of piece of paper, but you can still do it. You know exactly the algorithm. You take this, multiply every one, and then shift by one, multiply everything, add everything together, and then you're done. If I give you the reverse, I say, here's a number, tell me which 2' number I multiply together to get there. Well, it's not impossible. Everything is possible. But it's really damn hard. Right? If I give you 15, yes, 3 and 5, it's easy. I give you 143, and 1 and 13, no, 11 and 13 is fine. I give you 4,057. Then some of you here might be programmers. They'll be like, wow, that's simple. I'm going to go take my favorite language, Fortran, the most powerful language out there. You select a for loop. You say, okay, so it's 4,000 something. So I'll take all the prime numbers that I know between 0 and 4,000 something. I'll do a for loop and multiply 2 by 2 together, and then I'll find it. Okay? Like, good, yes, that's fine. Now, if I give you a number with 400-digit number, so something like 4,000 bits, there's a lot of prime numbers between this and the square root of it. So your Fortran loop on the best computer you'll find will take you about 15 billion years to find a number, right? That's an impossible problem, right? It's not impossible, we know how to solve it, but it's physically impossible because it's not enough time in the universe to do it. So RSA is based on that type of mathematics. I'm not going to go into detail of exactly how it works, but let's say I want to really make it simple, let's say I want to log in on Facebook. I say, not Facebook. Facebook says, yeah, hello. So if you want to sign in, you have to give me your password. So here's my public key. The public key is 2 prime numbers that have been multiplied together. So it gives to me and the entire world the public key, the product. Everyone knows it. Okay? So you can probably Google Facebook public key. Actually, it's in your browser. You can find it. Take your password, get into an easy mathematical operation with the product and your password. That creates an encrypted one. You send it back to everyone to see. But the only way to retrieve the password is by having access to the 2 prime number that Facebook started with. Facebook knows it, and they're the only one that knows it. The hacker in the middle, the best they can do is grab the public key, the product, and then try to find the 2 primes. And that will take billions and billions of years. So that's what we call security nowadays. It's much more complex than that, but that gives you the gist of it. Okay? So we're not secure. We are what we call computationally secure. We assume that nobody has 15 billion years on their hand to do that. Or that in 15 billion years, your password, hopefully you will have changed it. So what I'm saying here, what I've done is an example of what we call asymmetric cryptography, or public key cryptography, which means that everything is done out in the open. Okay? There was no pre-shared secret. I don't even trust Facebook. Actually, I have to trust Facebook, but Facebook does not even trust me. Okay? And then when we have a public conversation, the conversation is open to anyone. Now, I mentioned factoring, which is based on I mentioned RSA, which is based on factoring. There's other algorithms out there, like for example, elliptic curve cryptography, which is based on the discrete log of elliptic curve, or Diffie-Hellman, which is based on the discrete log. All of these asymmetric, every asymmetric algorithm we're using today, we know exactly how to solve that mathematical problem using a quantum computer. We know the algorithms. It's called Shor algorithm, which is number 1. It was like number 1 in 1994. We apply Shor's algorithm, we can solve factoring, we can solve elliptic curve discrete log, we can solve regular discrete log. So all of the security that we have deployed today, all of the asymmetric security, is completely common in the quantum world. And that's a problem. Because all of a sudden, goodbye e-commerce, goodbye authentication, goodbye signing up to Facebook, goodbye Snapchat. What do you do without Snapchat? I mean, my evening would be boring. So now, the question is, when do I start freaking out? We're not in the business of peddling fear. Like, the last thing we want is being fear-mongering. Because actually, personal story, the reason why I was attracted to work with ISARA is that I love quantum technology so much, I want to make sure that it gets out there, that everyone can benefit from it. I don't want it to become a weapon, so that it becomes classified, and then only governments can use it. So I love it so much that I want to make sure that things like this, like the bad part, does not happen. Okay? So now the big question is, when do I start freaking out? When are we going to have a quantum computer that is powerful enough to create havoc in information security? Which is a fair question. I'll make a little detour, just as a fun thing to talk about, like, the idea of quantum computing is not just like one day we have it, the next day, one day we don't have it, the next day we have it. Right? It's not going to be like it's going to be a progress. Okay. Today, do we have quantum computers? Yes, absolutely. Go to IQC, you'll see several prototypes of quantum computers. Are they useful? No, they're useless. They're very fun scientific experiment, but we're not at the point where the quantum computer is large enough to do something useful. We're not yet in what we call the quantum advantage era. But that era is coming, my professional guess, within 5 years. Within 5 years, we'll have quantum processors. I call them analog quantum processors. Quantum processors that are specifically designed to do a very specific task, but that will allow you to solve things that no computer on Earth can solve. So that's you get into advantage. It will be very limited. Very likely it will be very specific scientific problem to do with material science, many body problem, that sort of thing, which you might think as a typical user boring, but just like doing simulation of chemistry can be boring for you, but when you take a Tylenol and then your headache is gone, you're pretty happy about this. It's because some people were doing simulation before, right? So it doesn't impact you right away. You won't have a quantum Snapchat just yet. Probably haven't. But this is the idea of useful, practical, advantageous quantum computers. 5 years, and I'm being very conservative. Some people might say even shorter than that. Not 2 months. 2 years is not crazy. And then you will have what we call noisy quantum computer, where they start getting bigger and bigger, but it's still not perfect. Right? They can run for a certain limited amount of time. They can only compute for a certain amount of time. So now you start getting more and more application. Right? Maybe not all of the applications you want, but you start getting more computer science-y type of thing, more maybe artificial intelligence, machine learning, you start being able to compute on data. Right? So at that point, 5 to 6, 7 years, we might get there. And then you get to what we call the universal fault-tolerant quantum computer, which would be the equivalent of our computer today. Computers that are error-free, or error-corrected at least, that can run for days and days and days, and then although they have errors, those errors get taken care of. It's like my laptop right now. Well, it's not a Windows machine, so it doesn't bug as much, but it still bugs. There's still tons of error in it, but it gets corrected. Right? So that's why I can run a software for days, and it will still work fine. This is when we start looking at computers that may break security. So we're talking in the 10 years plus. So don't start freaking out now, just yet. But what I'm here to talk to you about is that it's not because we're going to break security in 10 years that we need to wait 10 years. Actually, I'm here to sort of kind of make a point of that. It will be the worst thing you need to do. Because although your security won't be broken for another, let's say 10 years, maybe 15, maybe 20. There are some solid cases, there are use cases where you need to worry about it today. And sometimes today is already too late. I'll give you a couple of very concrete examples that can be a little bit surprising. But before I get there, I want to mention that this is a problem. If there's any cybersecurity folks here, or people who just worry about their privacy, we hear about threats all the time. We hear about Heartbleed a couple of years ago, or Sony who get hacked, or Equifax who got hacked. Right? We hear about those hacks all the time. Now, if you do bitcoins now, I mean, what they were able to hack into $192 million bitcoins. The hackers are everywhere. But they never, ever, at any point, crack the cryptographic layer. You can think of security a whole bunch of things stacked together, right? At the top, you have the user, the one that sets the password. This is the most vulnerable part of a cryptography infrastructure, right? We call it the idiot behind the keyboard problem. When Equifax got hacked, how did it get hacked? They found passwords. Which password was the most used? God. 3 letters. That's the idiot behind the keyboard problem, right? Or you can have the most, nowadays people say you need to have capital letters, numbers, special characters. It becomes a pain in the ass to find a good password. And it becomes hard to remember them. So what do people do? They write it on a post-it note, put it on their screen. It doesn't matter how good your password is, if you put it on your screen, right? Or you can have some administration or architecture problems. So a badly implemented system can have some backdoors or can have some vulnerability. But the cryptography layer, the math layer, was never, ever broken. So when you worry about cyber threat, you worry about the top layer. So first of all, you don't know what's coming. That's the thing with cybersecurity, is you're always in reactive mode, right? You know you're hacked once you got hacked. So now this is a completely different type of threat, because we know exactly where it's going to hit. It's going to hit at that bottom layer there. And we're going to know exactly what it's going to do. It's going to crumble everything. So now the strongest link of your chain becomes the weakest one. Actually, it doesn't become the weakest one. The strongest link of the chain is gone. So the chain is completely gone. So what can we do about this? Well, there's a couple approaches. One approach that we can talk about is something called quantum key distribution. Turns out, you can use quantum mechanics to create information security that is literally unbreakable. And what I mean by literally unbreakable is like you can prove from an information theoretic approach that there is no way for you to break that security. Doesn't matter how powerful your computers are, how much time you have, it's impossible to. That relies on quantum mechanics. Lots of people like QC works on this. Shehan, right there at the back, right? He's an expert in this. We build those systems. Those systems exist. This is actually a picture from Shehan's lab, who they bought from a company called ID Quantique in Switzerland, where you can buy a quantum cryptography system that uses a quantum state of photons to exchange a key between 2 locations. And then that key is then used to do the one-time pattern called Vernon cipher and yada yada yada. And I'm just dropping names now, just show you that I studied for a long time. But this is a way, using quantum mechanics to beat quantum mechanics. Awesome. Very good, cool science. Very nascent type of technology. Still a little slow. It has some downside. Distance is a problem. You cannot really do more than 100 kilometers at the time. So having a channel secure between here and Toronto is feasible. Between here and Beijing, not so much. There's technological problems. So, it's unconditional security with some technological caveat. Or the other way, which is the one that we worked on at ISARA and other people worked on around the world, is the idea of what we call quantum safe cryptography, where we use the same principle of using math, but different type of math. Math that are also hard for quantum computers. Because remember, I mentioned, quantum computers is not good at everything. It's good at something. It's not good at other things. And there's a whole bunch of other things where we don't know. But the idea of what we do is we are focusing on different type of math that are not factorization, that are not discrete log, but are a mathematical problem where we strongly believe. And by believe, I don't mean like we just believe. I mean, we conjecture. The research shows that as far as we can tell, a quantum computer cannot solve those type of problems. So I put 5 here, which are the 5 main ones, like hash-based, code-based, lattice-based, multivariate, isogenies. See those as just based on different type of primitive mathematics, right? They used to be factoring, there used to be discretized. Like example, code-based, it's once you have an error correcting code, it's extremely hard to find a decoding the decoding circuit. So it's based on that idea. LAN is based. And it's the simplest one to explain. Let's say you have a bunch of points that trace a lattice. Your job is to find what is the shortest 2 vector I can use that serves me as a basis to replicate that lattice. Turns out in n dimension, it's an extremely hard mathematical problem. Multivariate base is based on like field, like it's equation of power 2 in some field of mathematics, blah 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 blah. And isogeny based, that one is like way out there. I don't even want to start looking into this. But these 5 areas of math are widely believed in conjecture to be secure against a quantum computer. So this is in a nutshell what post-quantum cryptography is. And this is what we work on. How can we design algorithms, implement them, make them more, optimize them, make them efficient so that we can replace our current technology with this new technology in a way that is seamless, so that if you don't realize that we just switch your algorithm, you switch your crypto, we've done our job right, in a way that is interoperable, so that the old stuff that hasn't been updated yet still work. It will be vulnerable, but at least the worst thing that we can do is saying, okay, tomorrow we update everything at once. If we say, like, I would need to say, okay, stop using the internet for at least 15 years. Then you can start using it. I don't think you'll go along with that, right? Last time, this is a true fact. Last time the Canadian government updated their signing algorithm, took them 17 years. From the first computer they updated, the last one. Okay? And this is just the Canadian government. I mean, it's a slow government. It's a fairly small government, but it's not the entire planet. Okay? So this is a major, major challenge. Because how many years do we have? Well, we have the amount of years that we'll get a quantum computer, which might be 10, 15, 20 years. So right there, it's like just from an argument of it's going to take a while, is an argument of things like you should start now. But one thing, it should be a good enough argument. But when you talk about business, it's like, if it doesn't make me money today, I don't care. It's the next guy's problem. So it's not an argument that everyone's bought. They should, but they don't, because we're very short-focused. Let me build you a couple more arguments that are even stronger than this. Let's look at secure communication. Let's look at you trying to communicate information that you want that is highly, highly secure. Your health information, state intelligence, corporate secrets, an email you really, really don't want your mother to discover. I don't know. But let's say you want to send information from one place to the next, and you want that information to be secure for, let's say, 15 years. Okay? Well, if you send it today on the internet, I might be recording it. I don't know what it means. It's encrypted. It means nothing to me. But I recorded the encrypted version. And I recorded your public key as well, by the way, because I recorded everything. 10 years down the road, aha, I have access to a big enough quantum computer. Now I know your information. Because from the private key, now my quantum computer, which was classic private key, I can use my quantum computer to find me the private key, which is derived from it, and then unlock your encrypted information. So the information that you sent 10 years ago is vulnerable. Or the information that you sent, every single bit that you send on the internet today is vulnerable to what we call a harvest and decrypt attack. I can record it, wait. When I have a quantum computer, I decrypt it and I have access to it. So, secure communication is vulnerable today. So if you're in the business of securing healthcare record, IP, intellectual property, you name it, you need to worry about that today. That's an example. How long are you going to be? Another example. That was my favorite. Your car. First of all, I didn't know cars. I'm old school. I thought cars was like pistons and stuff. Cars are software on wheels. Okay. When you press on the pedal doesn't talk. It doesn't talk to the brake. The pedal talks to a computer. The computer talks to the brake computer. The brake computer tells the brake to stop. Okay. It's all a mini internet. Nowadays, we've heard it more and more. Software over-the-air updates. Now your car, maybe not the one from today, but the one that you're going to buy in the next 5 years, will be connected. If you have a Tesla, you have a connected car. Tesla was the first one to go production saying, we're going to push software updates via Wi-Fi to your car. Every car manufacturer are going that way. Why? Turns out that half the recall, half of the time where a car manufacturer recall an entire fleet, it's quite literally to stick a USB stick in your car and upgrade the software. So that cost them billions and billions of dollars for something they could do just over the air. So software over the air update is like the next big thing, the next big evolution in auto manufacturing industry. Okay? They think by 2025 they will save as an industry $35 billion. So it's not pocket change. Okay? It's a lot of money. If $35 billion is not much money for you, good for you. But it's a chunk of change. Okay? In order to do that, the way you do software over the air update, just the same way that when Windows send you an update, or iOS send you an update, or your phone, whatever. So what it does is it sends you the software, but then it has to prove to you that the software came from the manufacturer. So what we call authentication. And in order to do that, normally the manufacturer will imprint, like, I have a phone here. Inside there's what we call a root of trust. Okay? There's somewhere on the chip, a number that was burned in it. It's actually a public key. A public key got burned in it, and the only place, like it's way deep inside a little enclave, the only way it could have been there is by being done at manufacturing time. So when they send a software update to this, my phone check the digital signature of that update against that root of trust that is in there, and then it says, okay, yes, I can trust that person. It's actually the manufacturer. Okay? Remember, this is a root of trust, which is a public key. Now, typically, this is an RSA root of trust, based on factoring. So if I have a quantum computer, I could pretend to be Samsung, and then send something to my phone. So now, if I have a quantum computer, I can pretend to be Tesla. Send a software update to Tesla, control the car, turn a fleet of Tesla into a weapon if I wanted to. I just need one car, not just steal it and then I use it. Okay? So now, put some timeline on this. Car, they make the design cycle is about 6 years, 5 to 6 years. So if they decide today, it's like, okay, we're going to start going software over the air. 6 years later, the first car hit the road. Okay, so we are in 2025. Cars are on the road for, on average, 13 years. So we're in 2038. Every single car that hit the road in that lifespan is vulnerable to a quantum attack. Because their root of trust is classic cryptography. So what are the chances that we have a quantum computer in 2038? I don't know, but it's not zero. So cars are vulnerable. Who would have thought? They're vulnerable today. Because they're long-lived devices. Cars is just an example. I call it nowadays IoT devices, Internet of Things. Anything that is long-lived, that will be deployed and cannot be reached for a long time. Satellites, sensors on the grid, the windmills in the middle of the ocean. All of those things, if we don't design them to be quantum safe secure today, we're going to have a problem in 10 years or 15 years. I mean, it's not an unsolvable problem, but it's going to be a goddamn expensive problem to solve. And then the other argument was sort of my original argument of sometimes it will take. It can take a lot of time to upgrade things. And another example that I like is, any one of you have worked with those things that work? Those smart card, right? You can open the doors, you can buy your lunch with this. This has cryptography in it. Because when I arrive at the door and I tap it, I have a certificate in there that says, this is Martin Laforest, and I have my public key in it. And then the door changed me a challenge. I signed it with my private key that's on it, checked it against my public key. He's like, all right, that guy, check out, he comes in. Okay? Anyone with a quantum computer can become me. So again, this is not long lived, right? I can cost 20 bucks, you can have a new one in 5 minutes. So right now, it's not a problem. But I work at ISARA, there's 40 of those. So upgrading 40 of them will take our security guy maybe 2 hours. This is a system, what we call the public key infrastructure. So all of the certificate management thing behind it, of the Department of Defense of the United States. It's 4.1 million keys. It's like this, 4.1 million. About 10 million server stacks. Doors across the country. And here by doors, I mean the door you walk in, the computer they plug their card in. They cannot go to the bathroom without checking in with their card. So upgrading a public key infrastructure like this, we're talking at least 15 years and many billions of dollars. So if you haven't completely updated your system in 15 years and a quantum computer show up, you've got a problem, right? So those are just very concrete examples of what I show. It's like, yes, we are like, I am not here telling you that we're gonna have a cryptographically relevant computer today that would be discrediting me as a quantum scientist. And I'm not here to tell you it's gonna be there in 2 years as well. Nobody in their right mind will say, we're gonna break security in 2 years. The science is not there yet. But in 10 years, it's not crazy. 15 years, definitely not crazy. And those are cases, hopefully, solid arguments is like, although it's in a while, in some cases, it's already too late. You would like to say the best line was yesterday, your second best line is today. So that's I took more time than I wanted, we kind of went meander around, but that's not what I wanted to talk about is, we're not a quantum company. Like, we're a software company. We implement algorithms, we implement math, but we exist because of quantum. And quantum has so much to offer. The worst thing that could ever happen is that we're not ready for the bad side. That would be as bad as, in my opinion, as nuclear power. Like, if nuclear power would not have been known first for destruction, then the nuclear would not have that much bad rap. And nowadays, don't fool yourself. Nuclear power is the only green energy that is sustainable. And now we're having entire countries saying we're not going to use it. So we're killing the way forward because we're not able to mitigate the bad so that we can read the good. The good thing with quantum computers and quantum technologies is that we know exactly where the bad is and we know exactly how to fix it. And then we can start today. So, ISARA is a company, we're probably the largest in the world that are selling those type of products. Again, I'm not here to do a selling pitch, but we are out there working with governments, with industry. We have partners who are looking into, nobody is deploying it production style just yet, but we're getting there, and it's getting more and more traction, because again, I keep on repeating myself, at the end of the day, we want to be ready, we want to build a wall before it's too late, so that quantum computing is open, and everyone can benefit. So that's kind of what I had to say today, and I'll be more than happy to answer questions about anything.
Thank you so much, Martin. Questions, please. Yes.
So you are saying that the technology ISARA is using protects against, doesn't matter how strong a quantum computer can be?
So, quantum key distribution will protect you if it's, again, if it's implemented perfectly and yada yada. Quantum key distribution is what we call theoretically, information theoretic secure, which means that there is no assumption about your computational power. So you could have the biggest computer of the universe, doesn't matter, it's secure. What we do at ISARA, we base on math. So we are providing computationally secure security. So it's the same idea as RSA is providing you computationally secure or computational security. So which means that, think of it that way. So think of it in terms of computational complexity. If you have a 100-digit number, it takes you X amount of time to factor. If you have a 101-digit number, it will take you X squared. If you have a 103-digit, it will give you X3. You have it's an exponential growth in the amount of calculation you need to do. Exponentially goes up really, really fast. Right? So you just say, hey, you can break my RSA 100. Okay, I'm going to use RSA 110. So it's going to be like e to the 10 times more hard. What we do on ISARA is the same idea. Our mathematical primitive can be solved. It's just they are exponentially hard to solve. So if you take your math problem and you make it big enough, there is a point where your quantum computer will take an exponential, will take billions and billions of years to solve. So we are making the same type of security assumptions. It's what we call the exponential growth of computing power, right? So that's the difference between unconditionally secure versus computationally secure. And yeah, so think of post-quantum cryptography as the quantum secure equivalent of everything we've been doing.
So you say something very interesting is that the governments are recording our conversations all over the world.
Oh yes.
And the NSA is probably one of the biggest one in the world.
One of them.
And isn't it counterintuitive that we want to implement something that cannot even break with a quantum computer? Because I want to know the content eventually, even if they cannot read it today with a quantum computer, then they can read it and maybe they won't go back to the database. If now we encrypt something with something they cannot read, it's going against to what their purpose is.
Well, now it brings a much bigger question of what's more important, the individual privacy or having a government that you trust to know everything.
Can you trust government?
Right? But this is right. This is a question, right? It's because nowadays, example, when you hear that the NSA knows everything, when you hear that the NSA reads your email, whether it's true or not, I'm not in the conspiracy theoretical, but people say the NSA read your email. Maybe they do. I guarantee you they haven't broken the security. What they've done, if they got their hands on the keys, in a way or another, some government around the world where privacy is forbidden, everyone can still use cryptography. It's just that the government have access to the key. So this becomes a politic problem, not mine. Okay? I have my own personal argument on privacy versus clarity. Those are my personal views that has nothing to do with whether security is important or not. The policies behind it becomes a political problem. So then, but is it, we're not doing anything that we haven't done before. Before, we had, RSA, elliptic curve, there's no backdoor in those. These people record them, hoping to break them one day, but maybe not, I don't know, but they were doing it before we thought that a quantum computer might exist. So, are they gonna stop recording? I don't know. If they like to waste their memory space, sure, you can go, but we're not offering more security than we have. Sorry. In the classical world, now that we're moving toward the quantum, we're not reinventing security. We're just saying like we want to achieve the same amount of security in the quantum world that we have in the classical world. So
they can always force you to hand over the keys.
Huh?
They can always force you to hand over the keys.
Yes, and again, that's a politics thing. It's not a scientific thing, right? So the scientists, we do our job. The politicians do theirs, and then where we meet, well, this is your personal opinions. My personal opinion.
It just seems to be there's never going to be anything that's safe. That's the problem.
Yeah. And at the same time, right, you can say, well, example, one of the big thing against quantum key distribution, which is unconditional security. It's like, well, terrorists could use them. It's like, yeah, just like terrorists use RSA today. It's just, like, the argument is exactly the same. We're not changing the argument at all. We're just continuing the argument.
You have a question, David? No.
Well, all I'm saying is that, so it looks like what ISARA does is that you're still using constant public-private key, you put the math for private keys based on the system complex.
Yes.
Essentially. So that's compatible with today's infrastructure.
Well, is it compatible with today's infrastructure? That's what becomes tricky. And actually that's where, for example, a lot of our intellectual property comes in. Is I cannot just say, let's switch for that new math. Because nowadays, and it's a bit our fault, so first of all, I'll really backtrack a little bit. I should have mentioned that the public-private key type of cryptography, that's the one that is vulnerable, that's the one we work on to replace. The symmetric one, like the one we use, for example, AES, the one that are super fast, that you have a pre-shared secret, this is not vulnerable, this is safe. But usually in order to get to the symmetric part, you need to do an asymmetric step. So we protect that to bring you to the part that's safe. Now that being said, I'm trying to remember where I was going. What was your question?
How compatible are you?
Yes, thank you. You're right. Compatibility. So we were so confident that RSA and elliptic curve and Diffie-Hellman was the shit, and then we're never gonna have to touch it. That we baked them so hard, like they're almost like hard-coded in our software. So cryptography nowadays is extremely rigid. So you cannot just go in and say, hey, let's switch the math and it'll be done, right? Just ask your bank and go talk to your bank and say, hey, I don't like your security level. I want to use a key that is twice the size. The bank will be like, we're not ready for this. So is it compatible? Not as compatible as we'd like. But there are ways that we can massage it to make it as compatible as possible. This is what, if you do any type of, if you work in or read in cybersecurity, you hear a lot more these days, like the buzzword is called crypto agility. That's like the new sexy word in cryptography, crypto agility. Now we're very rigid, like, the parameters were almost baked in, hardwired. And then now we're trying to find ways to make it compatible as much as possible. Because one of the downside, I would say, of quantum keys, it's not a downside, it's a reality of things. One of the reality of quantum safe security is that there's no jack of all trade algorithm. RSA and elliptic curve are jack of all trade, in the sense that they're pretty fast, the keys are pretty small, they're pretty quick at signing, they're pretty quick at verifying, they're pretty, they're kind of good. Like, they're not excellent at anything, but they're pretty good at everything. We don't have that equivalent in quantum safe. In quantum safe, there's always a price to pay. Actually, there are some algorithms that are lightning fast at encrypting. but they have huge keys. Then some of them might be who have tiny, tiny little keys, or would have really fat bloated signature. Like there's always a bit of a trade. The trick of trying to migrate to quantum safe while keeping interoperability. You want the things that is upgraded to still work with things that are not upgraded. Also backward compatibility. While being able to kind of, all right, this thing was designed for only small keys. Like, well, now I have bigger keys. I mean, there are things that sometimes it's just going to be a hit that we're going to have to take. Right? When we talk, sometimes we talk with potential clients, and then they say, oh yeah, we're looking into this quantum security thing, and we decided to pass because we didn't like the performance. We're like, okay, what do you mean you didn't like the performance? Like the keys are too long. And I'm like, you have to suck it up, because if you want the security, that's what you have to deal with. There's no other way. So you can whine and not do anything and get screwed down the road, or it's just like, it's a reality of things, right? So and that's what we're saying, don't wait until the last minute. It's gonna be, if you want to upgrade your security, it's gonna be a long journey, because you have to make those steps. Is your infrastructure, can they handle this extra cost? But sometimes again, the extra cost can come to at a benefit. Now I'll take an example. I will not mention which algorithms because I always forget. But one of the math is extremely efficient at encoding information. It encodes like crazy fast, using very little computing power. But the decoding process is ridiculously slow and demands a huge amount of power. So now you're like, well, then that kind of suck. I'm like, no, think about it. Let's say you have an IoT camera that you want to send an image back to your server. An IoT camera has very little power, very little memory, and it's trying to encode images, which are a huge file. Then the encoding is very efficient, need little power, so you can do that on that little gizmo at that corner. But to decode takes a lot of power. Who cares? It's been sent to the server, and I have racks and racks and racks of processors, and I have all the time in the world. So actually, in that case, it's an advantage. You just made your infrastructure a lot better, because at the source, you're constrained. Where you have constraint, you have algorithms that actually works well with that constraint. At the other place, you have no constraint. So you can offload, and like the sort of the grid of the offloading and the moving the things around. It's not 100% complete, but if you tell me what are your constraints, what are your non-constraints, you can typically find something that can fit. So it's a making lemonade with lemon.
Yes.
So the current cryptography is based also on the hashing algorithm.
Yes.
That's kind of a digest, SHA-256 is like 256 bits. That's a digital signature, actually a digest, information digest for the content, yeah? And the assumption of the SHA-256 is that it's very improbable to have two different contents with the same hash. Do you address this? Because some people are saying having a quantum computer, you could find more contents hashing to the same value.
I'm glad you mentioned that. So, if you're not used to what a hash function is, it's a tool that we use a lot in cryptography. So it's a the good way of putting it is a digest. Give me any size string. Could be an entire book. Could be a couple of strings. Think of a hashing function as it will take. Think of it as essentially what's it called,
A label?
No, what you find when you put garbage in and it just spits out something. Whatever. It's a big machine. You throw whatever at it, and what comes out is a fixed size string.
Scrambling.
250 bits, 256 or 128, depending on your network. But the input can be anything, the output is always the same length. And the function, the way it's built, it has the property that if you have two input that are very, very similar, let's say the exact same input, but you just switch one bit, the output would be completely different. And it also has a property that what we call the collisions are very improbable. So if it's any size to a fixed size, of course it's not a one-to-one function, right? It's possible that two things get mapped to the same thing, but improbable. And it has to be a one-way function. It means that you can go one way, but knowing the digest does not allow you to find out what was spit at the beginning, right? So this is used all the time for what we call, not authenticity, but to make sure, for example, that if I send you a software, that the person in the middle did not change the software. So usually I will send you the software and the hash of the software. So that when you receive it, you will take the software, you will hash it with the same function, and then we'll compile the hash. Because the person, if they change something in the software, there is no way they will be able to change it in such a way, or it would be improbable that they change it in such a way that the hash would be the same. Okay? So this is used all over the place in cryptography. This is how Bitcoin works. This is how blockchain works. When they say they do a chain, they finalize a block, and then there's like a proof of work for the block, it's all based on hashes. Hash functions are actually quantum secure. Because the best attack you can do against a hashing function is an exhaustive attack, a brute force attack. Is try every possible input, and you try them until you find the output. The best thing that you can do against that is a brute force attack. And then we know that the quantum computer can speed up your brute force attack, but only by a square root. So if you need to try, if there's n possible input, so classically you would try them all, try to have n. Quantum computer, you only need to try square root of n. But it's not that big of a savings. So now we had SHA whatever that had 128 bit. So a square root advantage is like, well, instead of doing 128 bit, I'm going to double it to 256. Then it's the exact same thing. So the hashing function are very resilient to quantum computer. You just make them twice the size. So that's the one, and that's why if you remember one of the 5 areas of math, one of them was hash-based signature. Yeah. Hash-based signature or signature schemes, actually they are the original digital signature scheme all the way back into the 70s, based on Merkle trees. And then these are, they are quantum safe. And even better than this, they are quantum safe and they are standardized. So we can use them today already. We can start deploying. They're fairly efficient. And that's an example. Their key size are pretty small, 250 bits. But the public key is only 250 bits, but the private key can be gigabits. So that's another example of something good, but at the cost of something bad.
Okay. No more questions. I will ask the last question, and we will thank Martin for all the great talk, everything we learned tonight. Based on all the customers that you guys have, between all the different industries and verticals, who are the most worried about quantum threat people right now? Is it banks, big financial institutes? I don't know, hospitals, governments, or...
So, well, every vertical should be worried to a certain extent, okay? So, it really depends, at the end of the day, it really depends on your security obligation. So when we go out and talk with clients, we're not out there to convince them they need to move. Like, we don't know their business. But we lay out kind of the argument that I said, like, you know, look at what your security obligation is. Do you need to keep your, example, banks? Banks in Canada and the United States, they have an obligation to keep every single transaction for 7 years. So right off the bat, every bank has a security obligation for transaction of 7 years. And now you talk with them. It's like, what's your design cycle for creating your crypto? Is it 2 years? Is it 6 years? How flexible do you think you are? Can you think you can update it in a year? So if they say, well, you know, we need to keep it, you know, for 7 years, and we upgrade our system every year. So I'm like, you know, we have 8 years. You might want to start thinking about it, but it's not urgent. I would talk with Samsung. How long does it take Samsung to design a new phone? A year. How much does it cost to switch a phone? It's $1,000. Does Samsung should worry about this? No. So I'm not going to go after them. If they come to me and buy my stuff, sure, I'm going to sell it to them. But I would be the first one to tell Samsung, like, you don't have to worry about it. Not yet. So there are some that are obvious, like cars. Cars is an obvious one, right? Satellites, because satellites, once you launch them, you cannot go up there and stick a USB key in them. So healthcare, for the healthcare record, but now the problem with healthcare is that, you know, there's no such thing as electronic healthcare record, right? It's still paper and, like, they need it. It's so archaic that I would say, like, just first secure your stuff, no matter how. Or just put your stuff in electronics. So the healthcare, they wouldn't need it. It's just they're so young. They have other problems to figure out first. But it's hard to find a vertical where they don't need it. It's just not needed everywhere. It's very niche, and that's a bit our job. Is to go there and then talk with them, because we try to uncover the market as much as we're trying to fulfill a market. Because most of the time, people don't know they need it. And that's a huge part of our job. And that's why, for example, I got hired by ISARA to sort of go out, because I'm a big mouth and I talk, and it was mainly to do PSAs. And then if they find out, it's like, oh, actually, yeah, we'll have a problem, then bring in the sales team and the technical team and then figure out a problem.
Great strategy.
So we're opening the market as we go.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marty. Yes. Thanks everybody for coming. Hopefully in a month we will have the next meeting. Stay tuned for it.